You still can.
Leave now before Master finds you.
Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Be gone with you.
Hello everyone, today's video I'll be covering Hammer's 1959's version of The Mummy. If you watch Curse of Frankenstein, Horror of Dracula, and this movie back to back, you have the Terence Fisher trilogy of the first three Hammer horror movies. Also be the Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing monster trilogy. These three started a dynasty, and as I've said before, they made the horror genre popular again. It was once again written by Jimmy Sangster. After Hammer's had big success with their remakes of Frankenstein and Dracula, Hammer did The Mummy next despite their complicated relationship with Universal. This was the least problematic where Universal decided to just let Hammer remake their Universal monsters without any lawsuits or copyright issues. Peter Cushing plays John Bannon, an archaeologist who is very interested in the Egyptian mythology. His big mistake was not treating his leg injury because he was so close and excited to wanting to discover the tomb of Princess Ananka. If you pay attention, notice throughout the movie he limps. Despite Peter Cushing does do a good job in this movie as usual, his performances look down as mediocre, not as memorable as Van Helsing and Dr. Frankenstein, which I can see that. His character's a regular guy. He's not a scientist or a vampire hunter. He's an archaeologist. John Banning's father finds out he goes into severe shell shock and is treated in a mental institution. Despite getting good treatment, his father ends up being murdered by the mummy Karas. This movie takes place right in between 1895 and 1898. Christopher Lee plays Karas the mummy. The name Karas was the same mummy name in the Universal Monster sequels. The way he walks and attacks his victim as the mummy, he's like a slasher villain like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and when he runs after his victim, he's like the Terminator. From reading about his walking, his body language, he was not acting. Apparently he had some injuries while making this movie. Lee injured his back and shoulder injuries from lifting Yvonne Fernand. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. I know it's a French name. Sorry about that. Christopher Lee also injured himself during the swamp ending scene. He cannot see the underground pipes in the swamp scenes at the studio. He hit his knees and shins too many times. Ouch. This is a body language and facial expression performance by Christopher Lee. He doesn't have any dialogue as the mummy, but has dialogue as Karas in the flashback sequences. I said this before in my Hammer Horror Dracula video. Christopher Lee is one of the few horror actors who have played the Frankenstein monster, Dracula the Mummy, right up there with Lon Chaney Jr. The highlight of this movie is when John Banning reads the story on Princess Ananka's death flashback. I'm not sure how long this flashback story arc was. I should have set a timer for the flashback story. The very famous Egyptian legend story on how when she died, this made Karas sad and depressed, and he wanted to bring her back to life, but it was illegal, risky, and sacrilegious. When Karas was caught trying to resurrect Princess Ananka, they cut his tongue out. Originally this was supposed to be a very gore and bloody scene, but the British censors cut this out. Even not seeing it felt scared, and again, another example of not seeing it made it scary because your mind is racing how horrible it was for his tongue being cut out. But at the same time, they had a reason to do that. The actress who played Peter Cushing's wife wasn't much of a big highlight in this movie like Zita Johann was in the original Mummy movie. Where throughout the Universal Mummy movie from 1932, Ardith Bay sets out on a quest to find his reincarnation lover. It's not until the last minute Banning figures out his wife resembles Princess Ananka. If I had to pick between her and Zita Johann, points to Zita Johann, as still one of the best female Universal actresses. Isabel was not a bad character, just wasn't an interesting character. There was some potential, just wasn't used a lot. She had no personality or charisma like Zita Johann did in the original Mummy movie. And guess what movie she was in 1 year later? The Italian movie La Dolce Vita, directed by Federico Fellini, considered one of the greatest films of all time ever made. The actor who plays Inspector Mulrooney was played by Eric Byrne, who you all might recognize in Star Wars, when Princess Leia arrives in Alderaan. And ironically, both Peter Cushing and Eric Byrne were going to be in Star Wars over 20 years later. Inspector Mulrooney reminds you of Sheriff Lee Brackett in this movie, When John Banning tells Inspector Mulroney about the mummy cars of the murder, he does not believe him. Or how Banning tells Inspector that he shot the mummy twice, the 4-yard distance. Inspector Mulroney was skeptical on the mummy legends and the mummy was behind the murderers. Same way how Sheriff Brackett was skeptical and did not believe Dr. Loomis shot Michael Myers 6 times and the bullets did not work on him, things that he missed, referencing the Halloween 2. Peter Cushing was offered the role of Dr. Loomis in Halloween, but that's how I'll be saved for when I do future Halloween movie reviews in the future. With no help or relief from the police, John Banning tries to set up his own trap and figure out how to defend himself against the mummy Kares. When the mummy's about to kill John Banning, he sees his wife Isabel, seeing how she is the reincarnation and resemblance of his lost-deceased Princess Ananka. When he sees her, he kills the priest who ordered him what to do and who to kill. It's a change of heart for Kares when he finds the love of his life back and does not care about murdering people anymore. All he wanted was Princess Ananka back. George Pastel plays Muhammad Bey, a priest who controls the mummy Kares, wanting revenge on those who were involved when they found Princess Ananka's tomb, and they did not learn to leave the tomb of Princess Ananka and Kares alone. You can say he's the real bad guy in this movie. George Pastel was also in a James Bond movie, From Russia with Love. He was also in another Hammer Mummy movie a few years later, playing a different character in The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. The scene where John Banning talks to Muhammad Bey, having a friendly conversation on his work on finding ancient artifacts, and now Muhammad thinks that it's wrong to desecrate the old ancient tombs, saying that they should be left alone rather than being sold to history museums. John says that he's only trying to preserve their ancient history so they keep their history of ancient Egyptian legacy alive or will be forgotten. You look at both point of views with no right or wrong answer, but the killer mummy was wrong, of course. I don't remember how the dialogue goes, just watch this scene. Michael Ripper plays a drunk homeless man. This is the only Hammer movie to have Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Michael Ripper in the same movie together. Having watched a lot of these Hammer movies, I've noticed how Michael Ripper has been in a lot of these Hammer, Frankenstein, Dracula, and other movies, playing different characters, just like when Universal recycled Lionel Atwell, Dwight Frye, and other various actors. Well, I did like and enjoy this movie. It wasn't much of a remake to the first Universal Mummy movie, with some exceptions. It's mostly a remake of the first Mummy and the Mummy sequels. It basically borrows the same story format from The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, and The Mummy's Ghost, combines together. It can also be pointed out Hammer was mostly paying tribute to the Universal Mummy sequels. The movie ends in the same way the other previous Universal Mummy sequels. Either the mummy dies with his lover or he dies sad tragically alone. This one is the second closest best mummy horror movie ever since the original Boris Karloff version. As I said in my Universal Mummy series reviews, I still haven't seen Brendan Fraser's mummy movies. Those are more like action-oriented Indiana Jones-style movies. You all remember last year when I reviewed the Universal Monster Mummy movie series, Watch this felt like the same format, done Hammer style, but Hammer did this so much better. Unlike Curse of Frankenstein, Horror of Dracula, and The Curse of the Werewolf, which have great gothic fog atmospheres with gargoyles, this movie doesn't have that, but it does have nice, beautiful color shots of Egypt. For some reason, my own opinion, I find this movie more colorful rather than gothic, but still, the visual shots of Egypt are cool and pretty cool and nice. I know there were 3 more Hammer Mummy sequels. I will review those at some point. I didn't have time to watch and review all of them. Plus, neither Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing did not come back in these sequels. Unlike the Hammer Dracula and Frankenstein series, the Hammer Mummy sequels are the only ones with no Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing coming back. Then again, Universal The Mummy from 1932 never had any follow-up sequels. Same with the Hammer Mummy sequels. So why didn't I cover the Mummy sequel series? I only cover the basis of just Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing Hammer horror movies, talk about their main well-known popular horror series. Despite my next video will be a double review of the 2 Hammer horror movies that does not involve Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, Hammer's final Mummy sequel, originally had Peter Cushing, but he dropped out after the loss of his wife. That wraps up today's video. Tomorrow we dive into a double feature review. I won't even say it. It will be a surprise. See you tomorrow.